Okay. Oops. Fan off பண்ண மறந்துட்டேன். Suma Qian's Edward Watson's Introduction to Sima Qian's History of China, page 35. Sima Qian's disillusionment with his age went much deeper than questions of specific government policies. He was an historian with an extraordinary love and sympathy for the past, and he was keen enough to discern in the changes that took place during his lifetime the death of many of the ideals of the past that he most admired. He felt a nostalgia for the. Hey, this is not staying still. He felt a nostalgia for the days of the late Shao and early Han, when men could rise by their own abilities and climb to the highest positions. He admired the rough and ready ways, the faithfulness and friendship of the lords and their bands of retainers, the outspoken frankness of the old political advisers and theorists, the willingness of the great generals to share hardships equally with their troops. He was a hero worshipper who devoted much of his life to writing of the heroes of the past, while in his own day he saw the old freedoms, the old personal loyalties being stifled by an ever growing bureaucracy and a net of petty and exacting laws. His disillusionment with his own age and his nostalgia for the age that had ended appear in his history in countless wry and subtle ways. He wrote two companion chapters, Shi Chi 119 and 122, entitled respectively Lives of Good Officials and Lives of Harsh Officials. The former deals with men who distinguished themselves in the feudal states of the Chao period. The latter is devoted exclusively to officials of the reigns of Emperors Qing and Wu of the Han. Thus, he made his point that the men of an earlier age had known how to administer law and order without stooping to excessive sternness and cruelty. He wrote another chapter, The Lives of the Wandering Knights, Shi Chi 124, in which he paid tribute to some of the local bosses who exercised de facto rule in the provinces in the early Han. He freely admitted that these men had their faults, that their lives were frequently marred by lawlessness and violence, but he saw in them the last expression of the old ideal of the man of action who is loyal to his friends, sincere in his word, and ever ready to help the weak and unfortunate. Another chapter, 129, he devoted to the great financiers of the past, for he recognized that success in business was one manifestation, albeit in his eyes a not very worthy one, of human ingenuity, imagination, and freedom. Page 36. In another chapter, he expressed great admiration for the General Li Kuang, who shared the hardships of his men and who, though a rough man unable to make fine speeches, commanded by his conduct the admiration of the nation. Section 109 upon 10 and 21. To this portrait of Li Kuang, he contrasted Emperor Wu's two favorite generals, Wei Qing, who was never admired by the people, and Ho Ping, who amused himself playing football while his men starved to death. Section 111 upon 31. In a sense, Suma Qian was a romantic and conservative who, like many historians, lived in the past and could not see that the old ideals of personal freedom, the old chivalric code of personal loyalties, could not survive in a great unified empire administered by a complex bureaucracy. A government the size of Emperor Wu's could not tolerate the old laissez-faire policies. The nation could not afford to be weak in the face of the threat of internal revolt or foreign invasion. The central court needed strengthening. The local administration needed to be tightened up, and imperial dignity had to be asserted. Emperor Wu had the vision and will to do all these in the face of severe criticism. If it had not been for his strengthening of the Han, one cannot say what the fate of the dynasty might have been. But for one who knew and admired the age that was coming to an end, as Suma Qian did, it was not a happy time to be alive. Under Emperor Wu, much that was good was accomplished, but much that was good was destroyed. It was the destruction, not the accomplishment, that Suma Qian saw. My aim in this introduction has been to describe in brief some of the main features of the span of history covered by the Shi Qi, and it would seem appropriate to end my description where the Shi Qi ends with the reign of Emperor Wu. But Suma Qian's work has so often been compared to and discussed in connection with that of his great successor, Pan Ku, author of the Han Shu or History of the Former Han Dynasty, that it is worthwhile to look ahead briefly to the age of Pan Ku and note some of the ways in which it differed from Suma Qian's time. For almost a century after the death of Emperor Wu, Han rule continued without major internal disorder or foreign involvement. But the Liu rulers grew increasingly weak and ineffective, so that in AD 9, a High Court minister, Wang Mang, was able to seize the throne without opposition and set himself up as emperor of a new dynasty, the Xin. His success, however, was short lived, and rebellion brought his death and the restoration of the Liu family to the throne in 25 AD. The dynasty began a new life with his capital not at Shangan but at Loyang, farther to the east. The period known as the Latter or Eastern Han began. Panku was born in 32 AD during the reign of the first emperor of this new era and spent most of his life as an official writer and historian for the government until his death in 92 AD. This new Han differed in many ways from the old one. The early Han rulers had had many of the manners of the Novak's riches. The emperors were rough and poorly educated, the empresses occasionally ex dancing girls who had caught the fancy of their rulers. The royal family retained many of the ideals and attitudes of the earlier disordered times when quick action, daring, and imagination, not refinement and learning, had been the qualifications for success. Particularly for the from the time, particularly from the time of Emperor Wu, the dynasty had a fondness for magnificent display, grand palaces, high living. There was a rough, spirited, gaudy tone to the era. We have noted how things began to change during the reign of Emperor Wu. The full effect of these changes can best be seen in the contrast offered by the life and spirit of the latter Han. Emperor Wu established Confucianism as the state creed and opened the way for scholars to enter the bureaucracy by competitive examination. In the latter hand, most of the official posts were filled by men who had secured their jobs on the basis of scholastic achievement. The pursuit of learning, particularly Confucian learning, became the concern of all members of the upper class. Even emperors and empresses were students of the classics. The merchant class, that had begun to be powerful and important in the early Han, was degraded to the position almost of social pariahs, and the land owning gentry, the literati class, became the unchallenged leaders of society. These new arbiters of society disapproved of vulgarity and violence, of striving and gaudy show. They looked back to an ideal period in the early Chow when society had been perfectly ordered, when elegant rites expressing the hierarchical divisions of society had been carried out by virtuous and learned rulers, and they did all they could to recreate this ideal in their own time. Page 38. The Hanshu clearly reflects this idealization of the ancient past and the orthodox Confucianism of Panku and his age. In addition, Panku wrote a long poem, The Fu on the Two Capitals, Hanshu 100 and Wen Xuan 1, in which he compared the vulgar magnificence of the Western Han capital of Chang'an with the quiet elegance and refined frugality of Loyang. In view of these differences between the respective ages, it is not surprising that Panku did not wholly approve of the work of his predecessor, Suma Qian. Both Panku and his father Pan Piao have listed their specific criticisms of Shi Chi. They did not like the way Suma Qian used the Confucian classics as sources in his history, paraphrasing, chopping, and shifting around the material to suit his narrative. They objected to the importance that he gave to military upstarts like Chen Xie and Xiang Yu, who had never received official sanction for their power. They deplored Qian's defense of the wandering knights, whom they saw as no more than vicious outlaws, and they found his attention to the despised merchant class inexcusable. They were also among the first to make the charge that Suma Qian was a Taoist. I have mentioned these criticisms here not only because they represent the opinions of the first major critics of the Shichi, but also because they represent the opinions of most of the Chinese who read the Shichi for the following 2000 years. For the influence of the scholar bureaucracy continued with little break to dominate Chinese society until the revolution in 1911, and the attitudes of men of the later Han are more or less typical of the attitudes of the centuries of Chinese scholars that followed. The Shichi was always read, studied, and admired by the Chinese, but it was only the exceptionally imaginative critic who could see beyond the ideals of his own age to the age of Suma Qian, when these ideals were not yet formed, and understand and sympathize with what Suma Qian was trying to say. We have come to a time now when the ideas and assumptions of the old China, the China of the Confucian literati, no longer exercise their former dominance. It is a fit time for a new and we may hope less biased look at Suma Qian and his work. End of the chapter. So, this is the end of the chapter, introductory chapter of the world of Suma Qian. Now we are going to page 40, the biography of Suma Qian. So from here, biography of Suma Qian begins. The reign of Emperor Wu marked the high point of power and cultural achievement of the former Han and has always been regarded by the Chinese as one of the golden ages of their past. Not a little of the glorious reputation of this era was due to the literary efforts of two men, the poet Suma Hyangju and the historian Suma Qian. The life of Suma Hyangzu appears from the first to have been cloaked in an aura of romance, of secret elopement and young love, music and plaintive song. By contrast, the biography of Suma Qian seems lean and dull, touched only by one brief, shocking moment of drama. In a way, we are more fortunate than the scholars of Greek historiography, for we can say more of the life of Sumachian than they can of the lives of Herodotus or Thucydides. Yet, practically all we know of Sumachian is what he himself has chosen to tell us. To the end of his history, he appended a postface recounting the genealogy of his family, giving a brief summary of his father's and his own life, and discussing his aims and methods in writing his history. When Pan Ku came to compile a biography of Suma Qian for his history, he simply copied out this postface of his predecessor, added to it the text of a beautiful and revealing letter written by Suma Qian to a friend, inserted a few scraps of new information, and ended with the Chinese historian's customary paragraph of appraisal, in this case based upon remarks made concerning Suma Qian by his father Pan Piao and the scholar Yang Xiong. This biography of Suma Qian, compiled by Panku sometime around 60 to 80 AD, constitutes for all practical purposes the final word on the life of the historian. Contemporary hand sources give us no more than passing references to the man. Later writers have been able to do little more than mull over and occasionally confuse the evidence. In the absence of startling archaeological finds, we can say no more about the life of Suma Qian today than Panku said almost 2000 years ago. In recent years, there have been a number of attempts by scholars to go over what little evidence we have and extract from it every fact and supposition possible. Of these, the most reliable is the pioneer study of Wang Qiuwei, Ta Shi Kung Xiang Nian Kao, and the longer and more detailed work based upon it by Cheng Hao Sheng. These studies, however valuable as they are for establishing the chronology of Suma Qian's life and eliminating some of the misconceptions that have grown up about it, can add virtually nothing to the facts given in the original hand sources. It has seemed best, therefore, to present here a translation of these sources supplemented in the notes by whatever other facts or suppositions seem acceptable. A word of caution is perhaps in order at this point. In what follows, the reader unaccustomed to translations from the ancient Chinese may find himself confronted by a baffling profusion of strange names, allusions, and literary conventions. This chapter is acknowledged to be one of the most difficult of the Shi Chi, but at the same time, it is the most important germane to our subject. Since not all of the sections into which I have divided the translation are directly related to the life of Suma Qian himself, the less venturesome reader may without grace slots omit the first and third sections entitled Genealogy and a discussion of the essentials of six schools. For the rest, I must beg the reader's indulgence for infelicities of translation and a cumbersome exegetical apparatus. This is what Suma Qian has chosen to tell us of himself, and it seems only fair to let him speak in his own words. Shi Chi 130, the post phase of the grand historian. This is the biography of Suma Qian, page 42. Shi Chi 130, the post phase of the grand historian. Genealogy. Following custom, Suma Qian begins his account with a genealogy of his family, tracing it back, as is the wont with Chinese writers, to the golden ages of the legendary past. In ancient times, in the reign of Chuan Su, the Nansheng Chung was ordered to take charge of the affairs of heaven, while the Pei Cheng Li took charge of those of earth. In the reigns of Tang and Yu, that is Yao and Shun, the descendants of Chung and Li were re-established as the managers of the affairs of heaven and earth. During the Xia and Shang dynasties, these same Chung and Li families continued generation after generation to manage the affairs of heaven and earth. The Earl of Cheng Xiu in the Chou dynasty was their descendant. In the time of King Xuan of the Chou, 827 to 781 BC, the family lost its position and became the Suma family. The Suma family for generations had charge of the historical records of the Chou. In the time of Kings Hui and Xiang, the Suma family left Chou and went to Qin. This is in the years 676 to 618 BC. The Suma family left Chou and went to Qin. When the general of the central army, Sui Hui of Qin, fled to Qin, the Suma family moved to Shaolin. From the time the Suma family left Chou and went to Qin, they became broken up and scattered, some living in Wei, some in Chou, and some in Qin. From the branch of the family in Wei came the prime minister of Chungshan. The branch of the family in Chou was famous as hereditary masters of the art of swordsmanship. Kuai Wai was a descendant of this branch. In the Qin branch, there was a Soma named So who argued his opinions with Chang Wan. Thereupon, King Hui sent So to lead an army against Shu. After subduing it, he remained to guard his conquest. So's grandson Qin served the lord of Wuan, Po Chi. The name of Shao Liang was changed to Xia Yang. Qin and the lord of Wuan massacred Chao's army at Changping. After their return to Qin, they were both ordered to die at Tuyu. They were buried at Huachi. Qin's grandson was Chang. Chang was head of a bureau of iron under the Qin dynasty. In the time of the first emperor of Qin, that is in BC 221 to 210, Kuai Wai's great great grandson Ang served as general to the lord of Wu Xian, seizing Chao. When the various feudal lords were being made kings, Xiang Yu made Ang the king of Yin. When the Han forces attacked Shu, that is Xiang Yu, Ang went over to the side of the Han and his territory became the prefecture of Honei. Shang had a son named Wu Tse. Wu Tse was a master of the market under the Han. Wu Tse was the father of Si. Si was a lord of the fifth rank. All these men, when they died, were buried at Kao Men. Now, page 43. Okay. Suma Qian. Oh, goodness. The biography of Suma Tan. Tan or Tan, I don't know how to pronounce that, but I'll call it Tan. Si was the father of Tan, who became the grand historian. The grand historian studied astronomy with Tang too. He received instruction in the Book of Changes from Yang Ho. With Master Hyang, he studied the theories of the Tao. The grand historian held office during the eras from Qian Yuan to Yuan Feng, that is BC 140 to 110. He was distressed that scholars seemed to fall short in their understanding and were misled by their teachers, and therefore he wrote a discussion of the essential teachings of the six schools. The discussion of the essentials of the six schools. It was the it was the, கார்த்தி சொல்லு கார்த்தி. ஆ நான் இது சீமா சியனோட hello. That was my friend calling, and I guess கார்த்தி, சாரி சாரி, கால் ட்ராப் ஆகிக்கிட்டே இருக்கு. ம் பிஎஸ்என்எல் அவ்வளோ அழகாக நடத்துகிறானுங்க. ஆ பிஎஸ்என்எல் அந்த அலையில் நடத்தப்படுதுன்னு. ஆ ம் ஸ்- சி ஓகே, லைவில் வர வேண்டியதில்லை நீ. ஆ ஃபோன் சரி 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 சரி, அது ஒன்றும் பிரச்சனை இல்லை. இல்லை, ஸோ ஒன்று நாம் போடலை, விட்டுருவோம். சரி, அது போட்டோம். சீமா கியன் அப்படின்னு ஒருத்தர், ஒரு சைனீஸ் ஹிஸ்டாரியன். அவரோட ஹிஸ்ட்ரி ஆஃப் சைனா, நான் ரீசெண்டான ஹிஸ்ட்ரிஸ் தான் படிச்சிருக்கேன். இந்த கேம்பிரிட்ஜ் ஹிஸ்ட்ரி ஆஃப் சைனா இந்த மாதிரிலாம் இருக்குல்ல, அது சில பல வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னாடி அது மட்டும்தான் படிச்சிருந்தேன். ஸோ இப்போ சரி, ரொம்ப வருஷங்கள் யோசிப்பேன். அது அந்த பழைய ஹிஸ்ட்ரி இருக்கு இல்லையா, அது வந்து அவங்க எழுதுறானுங்க சைனீஸில், அவங்க பாட்டுக்கு வந்து 150 வால்யூம் 200 வால்யூம்னு எழுதுவானுங்க ஹிஸ்ட்ரி. எதுனா அதெல்லாம் படிக்கிறது வந்து பயங்கர கஷ்டம். அதனால் ஆமாம், அது அது வந்து அவைலபிலிட்டியும் கிடையாது ஆக்சுவலாக. நம்ம லைப்ரரியில் வந்து ஓல்டு புக் செக்ஷனில் இருக்கும் அந்த புக்ஸ் எல்லாம். அதை போய் கேட்டோன்னா அந்த லைப்ரரி அவங்களே கடுப்பாவாங்க. ஏன் சார் இந்த புக்கெல்லாம் எடுத்துன்னு வந்து படிக்க சொல்கிறீங்க, இதெல்லாம் நாங்கள் தூக்கின்னு வரதுக்கே கஷ்டமாக இருக்குது. அங்கேயே உட்காந்து படிக்கணும், நோட்ஸ் எடுக்கலாம், மற்றபடி ஒன்றும் பண்ண முடியாது. இது மாதிரி இப்போ தான் எல்லாம் பிடிஎஃப்ல. அது எப்பவுமே சேஞ்ச் ஆகாது. சரி, இப்போ இதெல்லாம் பிடிஎஃப் வெர்ஷன்ஸ் வர ஆரம்பிச்சிருச்சு இல்லையா கொஞ்ச நாளாக. அதனால் அது வந்து கவனித்தேன். ரீசெண்டாக கொரோனா பீரியடில் ஒரு வாட்டி வாசிக்கணும்னு ஆசைப்பட்டேன். அப்போ அது நம்மளோட கான்ஸ்டியூண்ட் அசம்பிளி டிபேட்ஸு அது இதுன்னு படிச்சுட்டு டைவெர்ட் ஆகிட்டேன். அப்போ படிக்கணும்னு நினச்ச விஷயங்களில் இதுவும் ஒன்று. ஸோ இப்போ மறுபடியும் திருப்பி இன்னும் லைட்டாக ஆர்வம் வந்தது. ஸோ படிப்போம் அப்படின்ட்டு அது ஸ்டார்ட் பண்ணியிருக்கேன். 43வது பேஜில் இருந்தேன் கரெக்டாக உங்கள் கால் வரும்போது. ஓகே, அதெல்லாம் ஒன்றும் பிரச்சனை இல்லை, நாம் பேசுவோம். அதை நான் அப்புறமா கண்டினியூ பண்ணிப்பேன். எங்கே இருக்க? அப்போ ஒன்றும் பிரச்சனை இல்லையே. அப்போ அப்படியே மயக்கம் போட்டு விழுற வரைக்கும் பேசு. என்ன போச்சு? ஆ. ம். எல்லாம் போயிருக்கிறாங்க. அதனால உனக்கு கொண்டாட்டம். ஆ. ஐம் அலோன். ஹோம் அலோன். ஹோம் அலோன். ஃப்ரீடம் டே இன்னைக்கு உனக்கு. ம். ஓகே. ம். இல்ல, இல்ல பேசலாம். அப்படியே லைன்ல இப்ப பேசு. அதுல என்ன இருக்கு? மயக்கம் வர வரைக்கும் பேசு. ம். அப்படியா? சரி, யூ வாண்ட் டு டேக் ரெஸ்ட். ஓகே. அ தூ தூங்கி தூங்கி எந்திரிச்சின்னா கால் பண்ணு. ஓகேவா? கொஞ்ச நேரம் தூங்கு. தூங்கி எந்திரிச்சிட்டு கால் பண்ணு. Okay. The discussion of the essentials of the six schools. It was the practice of Sima Qian and later Chinese historians to insert in the biographies of great literary men the texts of their more outstanding poetry, essays, or speeches. Instead of describing in detail the life of his father, Qian has here chosen to present the complete text of what he must have considered his father's most important contribution to literature. The great commentary of the Book of Changes says, there is one moving force, but from it 100 thoughts and schemes arise. All have the same objective, though their ways are different. The schools of Yin Yang, the Confucianists, the Mohists, the logicians, the legalists, and the Taoists all strive for good government. The difference among them is simply that they follow and teach different ways, and some are more penetrating than others. It has been my observation that the theories of the yin yang school put strong emphasis upon women's and teach that a great many things are to be shunned and tabooed. Hence, it causes men to feel restrained and bound by fear. But in its work of arranging correctly the all important succession of the four seasons, it fills an essential need. The Confucianists are very broad in their interests but do not deal with much that is essential. They labor much and achieve but slight success. Therefore, their discipline is difficult to carry out to the fullest. But in the way in which they order the etiquette between lord and subject and father and son. சொல்லு கார்த்தி. என்னாச்சு? நின்று பச்சா விக்க. ஆமாம், ரைட்டு. அதே பண்ணுறேன். வாழ்க்கை. என்ன சொல்கிறாப்புல? அப்படியா? என்னது இது? ஆ 11ல் 2011. லவ் ஆ ஆ ம் 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 ஆ ம் ப்ரொப்போசலுக்கு போன ஆளுக்கு ப்ரொப்போசரா போன ஆளுக்கு ஏன் வந்துச்சுன்னு. ஷானவாஸ் பேர். ஆமா. நல்லா இருக்கு ஸ்டோரி. ம் ரொம்ப நல்ல இல்லஸ்ட்ரேஷன், நம்ம டெமோக்ரஸி பத்தின ரொம்ப நல்ல இல்லஸ்ட்ரேஷன் அது. இட்ஸ் கமெண்ட் ஆன் எவ்ரிதிங். எனக்கு கண்ணுல தண்ணி வருது. ம் ஓகே. ம் 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 ஆமா, அது நான் வாயிலேயே கேட்டிருந்திருக்கணும், அந்த ஸ்டோரி நல்லா இருந்திருக்கும். மறந்து போச்சு. ம் 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 அப்புறம் யாருக்கோ ஓட்டு போட்டு வந்துட்டாப்புல. ஆ? நான் நினைக்கிறேன் இது டூ நான் ம், நான் நினைக்கிறேன் இது 2014 எலெக்ஷன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். ஏன்னா அப்போ தான் நான் வந்து ஜெயலலிதா ஓட்டு போட சொல்லி எல்லாருக்கும் சொல்லின்னு இருந்தேன். ஏன்னா 14ல் வந்து எப்படி எப்படி மோடி ஜெயிச்சிருவாரு, பிஜேபி வந்து ஃபுல் மெஜாரிட்டி வரும்லாம் நான் நினைக்கல அப்போ. ம். ஆ, அப்போ அப்போ இவங்க நான் அப்போ தான் நானும் லைஃப்பில் ஃபஸ்ட் டைம் அப்போ தான் ஏடிஎம்கே ஓட்டு போட்டேன் 2014ல். ஏன்னா எப்படியும் மோடி ஜெயிச்சிருவாப்புல. ஃபுல் மெ ஃபுல் மெஜாரிட்டி வராதுன்னு தான் நினச்சிட்டு இருந்தேன் நான். ஃபுல் மெஜாரிட்டி வராது. ஜெயலலிதா வந்து ஒரு 30 சீட்டு சப்போர்ட். இல்லை இல்லை இல்லை, தோக்கடிக்க முடியும்னு நான் நினைக்கல. பட் ஆனால் அந்த அம்மா கூட்டணியில் இருந்தாங்கன்னா நல்லா விரல விட்டு ஆட்டுவாங்க. ம், ஆமாம். ஸோ அதுக்கப்புறம் மறுபடியும் அவங்களுக்கு போடலன்னு வச்சுக்கோ. ஆ? அந்த ஒரு மொமெண்ட் அவ்வளோதான். நீ பர்மனெண்ட்டாக போட போகிறதில்ல இனிமேல் அவங்களுக்கு. ஆ? ம். 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 ஓ, அது என்ன கூட்டணியில் இருந்தாங்கன்றதுனால அப்படி தானே? 19 சரி விடு, இந்த வாட்டியாவது வந்து போட்டு போ. ஆ? திராவிடத்தை காப்பாத்துங்க. ஆ? ம். இல்லை, அது 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 என்ன அது என்ன அது அப்போனா அப்போனா உனக்கு வந்து நேஷ்னல் எலெக்ஷன் இம்பார்ட்டன்ட் ஒன்றும் லோக்கல் எலெக்ஷன்ஸ் இம்பார்ட்டன்ட் இல்லைன்னு ஃபீலிங். சரி, நோ. ஓகே. 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 ஓகே, ஐ கெட். ம். ஓகே. 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 ம். ஸோ அங்கே யார் டிசைட் பண்ணிக்கிட்டாலும் உனக்கு பிரச்சனை இல்லை. ம். இனி எல்லா எலெக்ஷனுக்கும் வருவேன் அப்போனா. எந்த எலெக்ஷனையும் விட முடியாது. ம். 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 ஸோ வருது, அடுத்த எலெக்ஷன் வருது இல்லை எலெக்ஷன். ம். அடுத்த வருஷம் வருது இல்லை, வந்து போட்டு போயிடு. ஹலோ. ஹலோ. ஆர் யூ தேர்? ஹலோ. தூங்கிட்டியோ? தூங்கிட்டியோ? ஹலோ. Hello, hello. Are you there? I guess you are not there. Hello, hello, hello. So, so let's go back to Sima Qian's book. Sorry, friends, for that call that interrupted me. I'll get back to Sima Qian's book. The Confucianists are very broad in their interests, but do not deal with much that is essential. They labor much and achieve but slight success. Therefore, their discipline is difficult to carry out to the fullest. But in the way in which they order the etiquette between lord and subject and father and son, and the proper distinctions between husband and wife and elder and younger, they have something that cannot be altered. The Mohists are too stern in their parsimony to be followed, and therefore their teachings cannot be fully applied. But in their emphasis upon what is basic, that is agricultural production, and upon frugal usage, they have a point which cannot be overlooked. The legalists are very strict and of small mercy, but they have correctly defined the distinctions between lord and subject and between superior and inferior, and these distinctions cannot be changed. The logicians cause men to be overnice in reasoning and often to miss the truth. But the way in which they distinguish clearly between names and realities is something that people cannot afford not to look into. The Taoists teach men to live a life of spiritual concentration and to act in harmony with the unseen. Their teaching is all sufficient, embraces all things. Its method consists in following the seasonal order of the yin yang school, selecting what is good from the Confucian and Maoist teachings, and adopting the important points of the logical and legalist schools. It modifies its position with the times and responds to the changes which come about in the world. In establishing customs and practices and administering affairs, it does nothing that is not appropriate to the time and place. Its principles are simple and easy to practice. It undertakes few things but achieves many successes. It is not so with the Confucianists. They consider that the ruler of men must be the model of conduct for the world. He shall set the example, they declare, with which his ministers need only comply. He shall lead and his ministers follow. But if it were like this, then the ruler would have to labor while the ministers followed along at their ease. The essential of the great Tao is to discard strength and envy and to do away with intelligence and understanding. One must discard these and entrust himself to the practices of Taoism. If the spirit of a man is too much used, it will become exhausted. If his bodily substance is put to much labor, it will wear out. If a man has early in life exhausted his spirit and body, it is unheard of that he should hope to attain the long life of heaven and earth. The yin yang school has its teachings and ordinances which apply to each of the four seasons, the eight trigrams, the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the 24 divisions of the year. And it declares that anyone who follows these ordinances will meet with good fortune, while anyone who goes against them will die or at least lose his position in life. But this is not necessarily so. Therefore, I say that the yin yang school causes men to feel restrained and bound by fear. Spring is the time for planting, summer for nurturing, fall for harvesting, and winter for storing away. This is the ever constant principle of the way of heaven, and if one does not abide by this, he cannot regulate and govern the world. Therefore, I say that in the all important succession of the four seasons, the yin yang teaching cannot be done without. The Confucianists consider the six classics as their law and model, but the books and commentaries of the six classics run to thousands or tens of thousands. Generations of scholars could not master their study, nor could a man in his whole lifetime thoroughly comprehend all their rules. Therefore, I say that the Confucianists are broad in their interests, but do not deal with much that is essential, that they labor much but achieve only slight success. But as to the etiquette established by the Confucianists between ruler and subject and father and son, and their distinctions between husband and wife and elder and younger, none of the other schools can change or improve upon this. The Mohists also honor the ways of the emperors Yao and Shun and speak much of their virtuous actions, saying, the foundations of the halls of Yao and Shun were three chi high with three steps of earth leading up. Their halls were roofed with untrimmed thatch, and their timbers and rafters were untrimmed. These emperors ate from earthen plates and drank from earthen bowls. Their food was coarse grain with a soup of greens. In summer, they wore clothes of coarse fiber, and in winter, the skins of deer. The Mohists bury their dead in coffins of tung wood, 3 thick, and when they raise their voices in mourning, they do not give full vent to their grief. They teach that funerals must be conducted in this way, setting this up as an example for all people. But if everyone followed their rules, then there would be no distinction between the honorable and the lowly. Ages differ, and the times change, and the things people do need not always be the same. Therefore, I say that the Mohists are too parsimonious to be followed. But since they emphasize what is essential and are frugal in use, theirs is the way to assure an ample supply for both individual and family. This is the point in which the Mohists excel, and none of the other schools can afford to overlook it. The legalists do not distinguish between those who are close to oneself and those who are distant. They do not differentiate between the honorable and the lowly, but judge all men alike by their laws. If this is so, then the obligation to treat those near to oneself with special deference and to honor those who are worthy of honor is destroyed. Such laws can serve as an expedient for a particular time, but they cannot be used for long. Therefore, I say that the legalists are strict and show little mercy. But insofar as they place the ruler in a lofty position and the subject in a lowly one, and make clear the division of authority between the various offices of government, so that there can be no usurping of unlawful power, they have a point which the other schools cannot improve upon. The logicians indulge in hair splitting and tortuous reasoning, making it impossible for people to follow their meaning. They decide everything on the basis of terms and overlook the realities. Therefore, I say that they cause men to be over nice and often to miss the truth. But if they can succeed in setting aside the names of things and get at their reality so that reason is not lost, then they have something that one cannot afford not to look into. The Taoist school proposes the doctrine of doing nothing, but it insists that thereby there is nothing that is not done. Its truths are easy to practice, but its words difficult to understand. Its teaching takes emptiness in inaction as its basis, and compliance and accordance with nature and the times as its practice. It recognizes as a fact that nothing is complete and finished, that nothing is constant in form. Therefore, it is able to penetrate the spirit of all things. It does not put material things first, nor does it put them last. Therefore, it is able to master all things. It has laws, and yet it is as though it had no laws, for it follows the times in all its undertakings. It has rules, and yet it is as though it did not have them, because it follows things and accords with them. Therefore, it is said that the sage is without great skill, but follows the changes of the times. Emptiness is the constant law of Tao. Accordance is the abiding principle of the ruler. Thus, all the rule, thus all the officers proceed to their business with a clear understanding of their respective duties. He who in reality comes up to what he claims to be is called upright, but he who does not actually measure up to his name is called vain. If a man pays no heed to vain words, then evil will not arise. The distinction between worthy and unworthy will become clear of itself, and white and black will become apparent. Thus, one can choose the one and discard the other, and thereby accomplish all things. He can be at one with the great Tao, which, formless and dark, yet lightens the whole world. Thus may one return again to the nameless. It is spirit which gives life to all men, and they assume their form in bodily substance. If the spirit be put to great use, it will become exhausted. If the body be made to labor greatly, it will become worn out. When the substance and spirit part, there is death. He who is dead cannot return to life, for that which has become separated cannot again be joined. Therefore, the sage regards those things with gravity. From this, we may see that the spirit is the basis of life and the substance is its vessel. If a man does not first put at rest his spirit and substance, but says instead, I can govern the world, what reason can there be in his words? Oh, goodness. Page 48. The early years of Sima Qian and death of Sima Tan. Since the grand historian was always in charge of astronomical affairs, he was not concerned with the governing of the people. He had a son named Qian. Qian was born at Lungmen. He ploughed and pastured on the sunny side of the hills along the river. At the age of 10, he could read the old writings. When he was 20, he traveled south to the Yangtze and Huai rivers in Jiangsu. He climbed Kuai Chi and looked for the cave of Yu Shekiang, and he saw the nine peaks, Honan. He, trailed, he sailed down the Yuan and Siang rivers, and in the north forded the Wen and Su rivers, Shantung. He studied the learning of the cities of Qi and Lu. He observed the customs and practices inherited from Confucius and took part in the archery contest at Mount Ai in Zhou. He met with trouble and danger in Po and Xue and Pengcheng. Then he passed through Liang and Shu and returned home. After this, Qian entered government service as a Langchong. He took part in the western expedition to the south of Pa and Shu, marching south as far as Cheung, Tse, and Kunming. He returned and reported on his mission. In the same year, that is 110 BC, the Son of Heaven first performed the Feng sacrifice for the house of Han. But the grand historian Suma Tan was forced to stay behind at Chaonan and could not take part in the ceremony. He was filled with resentment over this and lay on the point of death. Page 49. When his son Qian returned from his mission, he visited his father at the place where he was staying between the Low and Yellow rivers. The grand historian grasped his hand and said, weeping, our ancestors were grand historians for the house of Chow. From the most ancient times, they were eminent and renowned when, in the days of Yu and Xia, they were in charge of astronomical affairs. In later ages, our family declined. Will this tradition end with me? If you in turn become grand historian, you must continue the work of our ancestors. Now the Son of Heaven, following the tradition of 1,000 years, will perform the Sphinx sacrifice on Mount Tai, but I shall not be able to be present. Such is my fate. Such indeed is my fate. After I die, you will become grand historian. When you become grand historian, you must not forget what I have desired to expound and write. Now, filial piety begins with the serving of your parents. Next, you must serve your sovereign. And finally, you must make something of yourself that your name may go down through the ages for the glory of your father and mother. This is the most important part of filial piety. Everyone praises the Duke of Chow, saying that he was able to set forth in word and song the virtues of King Wen and King Wu, publishing abroad the odes of Chow and Shao. He set forth the thoughts and ideals of Tai Wang and Wang Shi, extending his words back to Kung Liu and paying honor to Hao Qi. After the reigns of Yu and Li, the way of the ancient kings fell into disuse, and rites and music declined. Confucius revived the old ways and restored what had been abandoned, expounding the odes and documents and making the spring and autumn annals. From that time until today, men of learning have taken these as their models. It has now been over 400 years since the capture of the unicorn. The various feudal states have merged together, and the old records and chronicles have become scattered and lost. Now the house of Han has arisen, and all the world is united under one rule. I have been grand historian, and yet I have failed to set forth a record of all the enlightened rulers and wise lords, the faithful ministers and gentlemen who were ready to die for duty. I am fearful that the historical materials will be neglected and lost. You must remember and think of this. Qian bowed his head and wept, saying, I, your son, am ignorant and unworthy, but I shall endeavor to set forth in full the reports of antiquity which have come down from our ancestors. I shall not dare to be remiss. Page 50. The biography of Suma Qian. Suma Qian becomes grand historian. The revision of the calendar. 3 years after the death of his father, Qian became grand historian. He read the various historical records and the books of the stone rooms and metal caskets. 5 years after this was the first year of the era Tai Chu. At dawn on the first day of the 11th month, the day Chiatsu, that is December 25th of 105, the zenith of winter, the calendar of the heavens was first corrected and set up in the illustrious hall. All the spirits received the chronology. The grand historian remarks, my father used to say to me, 500 years after the Duke of Chow died, Confucius appeared. It has now been 500 years since the death of Confucius. There must be someone who can succeed to the enlightened ages of the past, who can set right the transmission of the book of changes, continue the spring and autumn annals, and search into the world of the odes and documents, rites and music. Was this not his ambition? Was this not his ambition? How can I, his son, dare to neglect his will? Oh, so here Suma Qian, through his father, claims to be the next Confucius. That's an interesting, quite an ambitious beginning as grand historian. A discussion of the spring and autumn annals and the Shi Chi. The High Minister Hu Xiu once asked, for what reason was it that Confucius in ancient times made the spring and autumn annals? Actually, here I would like to add my own comments. While reading the six schools' philosophies, I think most of them match with Indian schools also. Probably here also there were six schools. I don't exactly recollect. Sankhya, Mimamsa, all those schools of philosophy. இந்த ஸ்கூல்ஸையும் அதுவும் வந்து எல்லாமே மேட்ச் ஆகிற மாதிரி இருக்குது. ஸோ ப்ராபப்ளி த சைனீஸ் அண்ட் இந்தியன் வெர்ஷன்ஸ் ஆர் த சேம். அண்ட் சைனீஸ் கேலண்டரில் வேறு வந்து ஜோடியாக்கில் வந்து 12 ஹவுசஸ் அதெல்லாமே இருக்குது. ஸோ ப்ராபப்ளி தே ஆல்சோ borrowed the zodiac from the Greeks, it seems. So let's continue. The Grand Historian, a discussion of the spring and autumn annals and the Shi Chi. The High Minister Hu Sui once asked, for what reason was it that Confucius in ancient times made the spring and autumn annals? The Grand Historian replied, I have heard Master Tung say, when Confucius was Chief Minister of Justice in Lu, the ways of the Chow had declined and fallen into disuse. The feudal lords abused him and the high officials obstructed his plans. Confucius realized that his words were not being heeded, nor his doctrines put into practice. So he made a critical judgment of the rights and wrongs of a period of 242 years in order to provide a standard of rules and ceremonies for the world. He criticized the Oh, he criticized the emperors, reprimanded the feudal lords, and condemned the high officials in order to make known the business of a true ruler, and that was all. Confucius said, if I wish to set forth my theoretical judgments, nothing is as good as illustrating them through the depth and clarity of actual events. Above, the spring and autumn makes clear the way of the three kings, and below it discusses the regulation of human affairs. It distinguishes what is suspicious and doubtful, clarifies right and wrong, and settles points which are uncertain. It calls good as good and bad as bad, honors the worthy and condemns the unworthy. It preserves states which are lost and restores the perishing family. It brings to light what was neglected and restores what was abandoned. In it are embodied the most important elements of the kingly way. The Book of Changes makes clear heaven and earth, the yin and yang, the four seasons, and the five elements. Therefore, it is most useful in matters of change. The rights regulates human relations, and so is excellent in matters of conduct. The Book of Documents records the deeds of the former kings, and so is most useful in government. The odes tells of mountains and rivers, ravines and valleys, of birds and beasts, plants and trees, and the male and female of beasts and birds. Thus, it best expresses the sentiments of the people. Through music, joy is achieved, and so it excels in harmony and peace. The spring and autumn differentiates between right and wrong, and so is most helpful in ruling men. Thus, the rites regulates mankind, music spreads harmony, the documents tells us of deeds, the odes expresses the will of men, the changes relates of transformation, and the spring and autumn discusses right. Therefore, for dispersing revolt, and turning the people back to the right, none of the other classics can compare to the spring and autumn. The spring and autumn consists in all of some 10 or 20,000 words, and its ideas number several thousand. The answers to how all things join and break away are to be found in it. It records 36 instances of assassination of rulers and 52 of kingdoms which perished, and the feudal lords who were forced to flee and could not protect their altars of the soil and grain. The number is too great to be reckoned. If we reflect on how these things happened, we will find in every instance it was because they lost the true way. Therefore, the book of changes says the error of a fraction of an inch can lead to a difference of 1,000 miles. And it also says when a minister assassinates his lord or a son murders his father, this is not something that came about in one morning or evening, but something that had built up gradually over a long period. Oh, so there was parricide. Patricide இருந்திருக்கு. And also the error of a fraction of an inch can lead to a difference of 1,000 miles. I think இது வந்து ஒரு மேப் மேக்கிங் அனாலஜின்னு நினைக்கிறேன். புக் ஆஃப் சேஞ்சஸ் கோட் பண்ணுறது மேப் மேக்கிங்கில் தான் ஒரு இன்ச் டிஃப்ரென்ஸ் போட்டிங்கன்னா அது ரியல் கிரவுண்டில் 1,000 miles வித்தியாசம் வரும். ஸோ for this reason, one who rules a state cannot afford not to know the spring and autumn. If he does not, he will fail to perceive slander near about him, or will not understand the reason when rebels rise behind his back. A man who is a minister must know the spring and autumn, or he will not understand what is proper in managing his regular duties, nor when an emergency arises will he know how to exercise independent judgment. One who is a ruler or a father and does not understand the principles of the spring and autumn will bring upon himself the infamy of chief and evildoer, while one who is a minister or a son and does not understand the principles of the spring and autumn will surely fall into the sin of rebellion or regicide and suffer the judgment of death. All of this comes truly from thinking one knows the good when one does not really understand its principles. Such men will stand indicted by the moral judgments and will not dare to deny their guilt. Okay, here I would like to make an aside. I used to think the impression that I was given by reading old history books whenever I used to... Sorry friends, call is coming. Sile. சார் சொல்லுங்கள் சார். ஆமாம் சார், வீட்டில் தான் இருக்கேன், லைவில் இருக்கேன், சொல்லுங்கள். ஆமாம், உங்கள் குரல் கேட்காது, என் குரல் மட்டும்தான் கேட்கும். ஸோ நீங்கள் கவலைப்பட வேண்டாம். உங்கள் ஓகே, வரீங்களா வீட்டுக்கு? இல்லை, லைவ் கட் பண்ணிடுறேன். நீங்கள் இன்றைக்கி எனக்காக ஒன்றாவது செய்யணும். அதெல்லாம் நான் வரலாம் தான், அது ஒன்றும் பிரச்சனை இல்லை. பைக்கில் வர முடியாது, நான் பஸ்ஸில் தான் வரணும். அதுக்கு வரதுக்கு 1 hour ஆகும். வரணுன்னா வரேன் நான். பட்டு நீங்கள் வீட்டுக்கு வந்தீங்கன்னா கொஞ்சம் பாட்டில் ராதை பார்க்க வைக்கலான்னு நினைக்கிறேன் உங்களை. ஆமாம். ஆமாம், பார்த்துட்டேன். நீங்கள் உங்கள் கமெண்ட் வேணும்னு நான் ஆசைப்பட்றேன், நீங்கள் ஆனால் பார்க்க மாட்டேன்னு அடம் பிடிக்கிறீங்க. சரி, எப்போது இல்லை, எங்கள் வீட்டில் ஓரளவுக்கு நல்லா ஃபுல் வால்யூமோட டிவியில் தானே பார்க்க போகிறோம். பிக் ஸ்க்ரீன், ஓரளவுக்கு 40 inch ஸ்க்ரீனு. காலை நேரத்தில் வந்தீங்கன்னா கரெக்டாக இருக்கும். 9க்கு வந்துட்டீங்க அப்படின்னா ஒரு 12 மணி வரைக்கும் படம் பார்க்கலாம். அதுக்கப்புறமா உட்காந்து நம்ம டிஸ்கஸ் பண்ண. சார் சரி, நான் இது மாதிரி வாழ்க்கையில் யாருக்கும் சொன்னதில்லை சார். இந்த படத்துக்காக சொல்கிற மாதிரி ஆயிட்டேன். என்ன ஆக்சுவலாக நிறைய பேர் படம் பார்க்க சொல்லுவாங்க. கார்த்தியால நிறைய என்னை வந்து படம் பார்க்க வைப்பான் அது ஆரம்ப காலகட்டத்துங்களில். எனக்கு வந்து அடுத்தவங்க வந்து வற்புறுத்தி தான் நான் படம் பார்த்து எனக்கு பழக்கம். வாழ்க்கையில் முதல் தடவை அடுத்தவங்கள வந்து நான் ஒரு படத்தை பார்க்க சொல்லி அதை வற்புறுத்திக்கிட்டு இருக்கேன். அஃப்கோர்ஸ். ஆமாம், இல்லை அதுக்கு முன்னாடி ஒரு 2 3 படங்கள் வந்து நான் தெலுங்கில் ஒர்க் பண்ணின படங்கள் அல்லது என்னோட கதை வந்த படங்கள் அந்த மாதிரி 1 2 வந்து பார்க்க சொல்லி நிறைய பேர் வற்புறுத்தியிருக்கேன் அந்த ஆரம்ப காலத்தில். அப்புறமா அப்புறமா அது வந்து ஒரு காலத்துக்கு மேலே எல்லாருக்கும் போர் ஆயிடுச்சுன்ட்டு விட்டுருவோம்ல. அப்புறம் அதை விட்டுட்டு நீ நீ ம், ஆமாம். கரெக்டு தான். ம். டைரக்டர் கிடையாது அவர். அப்படியா? அப்படியா? ம். ம். ஆமாம். ஆமாம்மா பண்ணியிருந்தா இருந்தார் அவருக்கு காட்டலை. ம். ம். குஜராத்தில் தான் போய் எடுத்துருக்கணும் அப்பனா. ஆ? ம். அவங்க தான் குடிக்க மாட்டாங்க. ம். கரெக்டு தான். இன்னைக்கு 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 ஸ்டார்டிங்க. இன்னைக்கு அவங்க வீட்டில் வெளில எங்கேயோ போயிருக்காங்க போல. காலிலேருந்து அப்பப்போ ஃபோன் பண்ணின்னு இன்னைக்கு நான் அப்பப்போ அவர் தான் என்னோட லைவ் டிஸ்டர்ப் பண்ணின்னு இருந்தார் இன்னைக்கு காலையிலேருந்து. அப்போ ஆ? ஓ. ஆ. ஆ. ம். 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 சார் சார் உங்கள் குரல் கட் ஆகுது. என்ன ட்ரெயின் மூவ் ஆயிடுச்சா? அது அப்படிதான் வேலை செய்யும். அது அப்படிதான் இருக்கும். ம். ம். என்ன என்ன அது கருத்து? ஆ. கட்டி கட்டி. ம். இல்லையே அந்த 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 கலர் பிரிண்ட் பேப்பரோட ஏதாவது ஒரு கலர் நோட்டும் கொடுத்துருப்பாங்களே. இல்லை அப்படின்னா இப்படி ஜெயிச்சிருப்பாரு. ஆ? ஆ. ஆ. ம். அவர் எங்க சார் போயிருக்காரா இப்போ? இன்னும் அவருக்கு பதவி பிரமாணம் பண்ணலையோ? ஆனால் வார்த்தை கொடுத்துருக்காங்க, பட் ஆனால் இன்னும் அதை வந்து நிறைவேற்றலை. ஆ? எதுக்கு போறாரா அங்கெல்லாம்? சார் சார் உங்கள் குரல் கட் ஆகுது சார். ஹலோ. ஓகே ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஸ், லெட்ஸ் கோ டு த அதர் ரூம். இந்த ரூம் வந்து வெப்பம் அதிகமாகிடுச்சு. ஸோ ஐ கோ டு த அதர் ரூம். తోసేసినావా? లేదు లేదు, ఆ రూమ్ బాగా భయంకరంగా ఒక్క అయిపోయింది. నువ్వు ఇవన్నీ తలుపు తెరిచేసినావు కదా, ఏసీ తగ్గిపోయింది.
నేను ఇద్దరు తెరిచిన
అదా తెలిసింది, దానివల్ల వీక్ అయిపోయింది, ఏసీ తగ్గిపోయింది.
నాకైతే కూడా కొంచెం పిలిచిపోయి తెలుస్తున్నాను కరెంట్ ఉంటే కూడా.
అవునా? ఏది నిలిచిపోయింది?
అదేమో కొంచెం గొంతులు ఉంది అని సుమారు 5 నిమిషాలు గొంతులు ఉంది.
టీవీనా ఏసీనా?
వేసే టీవీ కాదు,
ఏసీ ఆఫ్ అయిపోయింటుంది, అది కంప్రెసర్.
టీవీ నేను ఎప్పుడు పెట్టినా రూమ్ కాల్చేసిన 2 నాకు.
ఓకే.
పెట్టలే.
ఓకే ఫ్రెండ్స్, ఐ గెస్ it's visible. Oh. Page 53. Rights serve to put interdictions in advance on what has not yet taken place, while laws act on what is already past. Therefore, the usefulness of laws is easy to perceive, while it is difficult to understand the reason for the interdictions of rights. Hu Sui replied, in Confucius' time, there was no enlightened ruler above, and below worthy men were not employed. Therefore, he made the spring and autumn annals, handing down to posterity his theoretical judgments in order to decide on questions of propriety and duty, and to serve as the model for a king. But you, sir, live in a time when there is an enlightened emperor above, while all below are men fit for their positions. All affairs are handled properly, each ordered in his correct place. Now, in your writings, what is it you are trying to show? The grand historian replied, "Yes, yes. What you say is quite right, but you misunderstand my purpose. I have heard my father say that Fu Si, purest and most virtuous of ancient men, made the 8 trigrams of the Book of Changes. The Book of Documents records the glorious age of Yao and Shun, and at that time the rites and music were composed. The makers of the odes celebrated the golden age of Tang and Wu in song. The spring and autumn picks out the good and condemns the evil, exalting the virtue of the 3 dynasties and praising the house of Chow. It does not confine itself solely to criticism and ridicule. Since the rise of the Han, we have come to the time of our enlightened emperor. He has received auspicious omens and blessings. He has established the sacrifices of Feng and Shan. He has changed the beginning of the year, altered the color of the vestments, and received the mandate in his majesty and purity. His goodness flows over our land without bound. The multitudinous tribes within the 4 seas, translating and retranslating their strange tongues, have come knocking at our borders in submission. Those who bring tribute and beg for an audience are too numerous to be told. The ministers and 100 officials with all their might sing the praises of his holy virtue, but still they fail, they have not been able sufficiently to publish it abroad. Now, if there are scholars and worthy men of ability who are not made use of in the government, this is a shame upon the ruler of the kingdom. While if the emperor is one of shining holiness, and yet his virtue is not published throughout the land, this is a fault of the men in official position. I myself have for some time held this office of Grand Historian. If I should cast aside this shining holiness and supreme virtue and fail to make a record of it, if I should permit the labors of the meritorious ministers, the feudal families, and the worthy officials to fall into oblivion and not be transmitted, if I should allow the words of my father to be forgotten, I could certainly be guilty of no greater sin. When I say that I transmitted a record of past affairs, putting in good order the genealogies and chronicles, it does not mean that I made a work such as Confucius did. Therefore, when you compare my writings to the spring and autumn annals, you mistake their true nature. Page 54. The misfortune of Sima Qian. Here, Sima Qian refers to the accusation brought against him by the emperor and the punishment of emasculation imposed upon him. The letter to Jen An, quoted by Pan Ku and translated later in this chapter, describes the circumstances of this tragedy in further detail. For the next 7 years, the grand historian devoted himself to writing and arranging his book. Then he encountered the misfortune of the Li Ling affair and was plunged into the dark in bonds. He sighed bitterly and said, such is my fault, that I have brought mutilation to my body and may never again serve my Lord." He turned within himself and pondered deeply, saying, "The writers of the odes and the documents were troubled and in distress, and they tried to set forth the meaning of their desires and hopes. Of old, when the chief of the West, King Wen, was imprisoned at Yu Li, he spent his time expanding the Book of Changes. Confucius was in distress between Chen and Tsai, and he made the spring and autumn. When Shu Yuan was exiled, he composed his poem Encountering Sorrow. After Tso Chiu lost his sight, he composed the narratives from the States. When Sun Tzu had had his feet amputated, he set forth the art of war. Lu Puwei was banished to Shu, but his Lu Lan has been handed down through the ages. While Han Feizu was held prisoner in Qin, he wrote The Difficulties of Disputation and The Sorrow of Standing Alone. Most of the 300 poems of the Book of Odes were written when the sages poured forth their anger and dissatisfaction. All these men had a rankling in their hearts for they were not able to accomplish what they wished. Therefore, they wrote about past affairs in order to pass on their thoughts to future ages. So at last he transmitted a record of the past from Tao Tang, Emperor Yao, down to the unicorn, where he stopped, beginning with the yellow emperor. Now we are at page 55. Table of contents of the Shi Chi. Table of contents of the Shi Chi. Here follows a listing of the contents of the Shi Chi chapter by chapter. In Sima Qian's preface, the title of each chapter is preceded by a short description of the subject. When Panku copied this postface into his biography of Sima Qian, he recorded only the title and number of each chapter and omitted these descriptions. The descriptions are rather meaningless without a knowledge of the contents of each chapter, and so I shall omit the entire section. Sima Qian then continues his narrative. Concluding remarks of Sima Qian. This our house of Han has succeeded the descendants of the five emperors and has carried on the task of unification of the three dynasties. The ways of Chow fell into disuse, and the Qin scattered and discarded the old writings and burned and destroyed the odes and the documents. Therefore, the plans and records of the illustrious hall and the stone rooms of the metal caskets and jade tablets became lost or confused. Then the Han arose, and Xia Ho put in order the laws and commandments. Han Xin set forth the rules of warfare, Chang Sang made the regulations and standards, and Shu Sun Tung settled questions of rites and ceremonies. At this time, the art of letters began again to flourish and advance, and the odes and documents gradually reappeared. From the time when Cao San put into practice Master Kai's teachings of the Yellow Emperor and Lao Tzu, when Jia Sheng and Chao Tzu expounded the doctrines of the legalist philosophers Shen and Shang, and Kung Sun Hung achieved eminence for his Confucian learning, a period of some 100 years, the books that survived and records of past affairs were all without exception gathered together by the grand historian. The grand historians, father and son, each in turn held and carried on the position. Ah, I remember that my ancestors once were in charge of these affairs, and won fame in the time of Tang and Yu, and in the Chow, they once again managed them. So the Suma family, generation after generation, has been the masters of astronomical affairs. Now it has come down to me. This I remember with awe. I remember with awe. I have sought out and gathered together the ancient traditions of the empire, which were scattered and lost. Of the great deeds of kings, I have searched the beginnings and examined the urns. I have seen their times of prosperity and observed their decline. Of the affairs that I have discussed and examined, I have made a general survey of the three dynasties and a record of the Qin and Han, extending in all back as far as Xian Yuan, the Yellow Emperor, and coming down to the present, set forth in the 12 basic annals. After this had been put in order and completed, because there were differences in chronology for the same periods and the dates were not always clear, I made the 10 chronological tables. Of the changes in rites and music, the improvements and revisions of the pitch pipes and calendar, military power, mountains and rivers, spirits and gods, the relationships between heaven and man, and the faulty economic practices that were handed down and reformed age by age, I have made the 8 treatises. As the 28 constellations revolve about the North Star, as the 30 spokes of a wheel come together at the hub, revolving endlessly without stop, so the ministers, assisting like arms and legs, faithful and trustworthy, in true moral spirit, serve their Lord and ruler. Of them I made the 30 hereditary houses. Upholding righteousness, masterful and sure, not allowing themselves to miss their opportunities, they made a name for themselves in the world. Of such men I made the 70 memoirs. In all, 130 chapters, 5 lakhs 26,500 words. This is the book of the grand historian, compiled in order to repair omissions and amplify the six disciplines. It is the work of one family, designed to supplement the various interpretations of the six classics and to put into order the miscellaneous sayings of the hundred schools. I have placed one copy in the famous mountain and another in the capital, where they shall await the sages and scholars of later ages. The 70th chapter. The grand historian remarks, I have transmitted a record of the ages from the Yellow Emperor down to the era Tai Chu, comprising a work of 130 chapters. Okay, here Seo Qianoட biography முடியுது at page 57. Page 57. Additions of Panku to the postface of the grand historian. Hanshu 62. In his biography of Sima Qian in Hanshu 62, Panku has copied in the complete text of the postface translated above with the omissions already noted. He then begins his own narrative. Thus says the postface written by Qian himself. But 10 chapters are missing, there being only the titles but no texts. After Qian had suffered punishment, he became Chung Shu Ling, palace secretary, and enjoyed great honor and favor in the pursuit of his duties. His old friend Jen An, regional inspector Zhu Shi of Ai province, sent Qian a letter urging upon him his duty to work for the advancement of older officials of worth. Qian replied to it as follows. Sima Qian's letter in reply to Zhen Shaoqing. Shaoqing, honored sir, in the past I had the honor of receiving letter from you in which you advised me to be careful in my dealings with people and instructing me in my duty to recommend men of ability and work for the advancement of worthy gentlemen. Your concern is indeed kind and heartfelt. Perhaps you are angry that I have not marked your words and think that I am following the counsels of worthless men. I assure you I would not dare to do such a thing. Worthless old creature that I am, I have yet heard something of the teachings handed down from the great men of old. But I remember that I am no more than a mutilated being who dwells in degradation. Anything I might try to do would only meet with censure. Should I try to help others, I should only succeed in doing them injury. Therefore, I am in sadness and despair with no one to speak to. There is an old saying, whom will you do it for and whom will you get to listen to you? After Chang Tzu Chi died, Poya never again played upon the lute. Why? It is for a friend who understands him that a man will act, and for a lover who delights in her that a woman will make herself beautiful. But one like myself, whose very substance is marred and mutilated, though I might possess the worth of the jewels of Sui and Ho, though my conduct might be as pure as that of you and I, in the end I could never achieve glory, but on the contrary would only succeed in arousing laughter and bringing shame upon myself. I should have answered your letter, but at the time I had to accompany the emperor on a trip to the east and was pressed by many petty affairs of my own. The time we had together was indeed short, and I was so busy that I could not seem to find a moment of leisure to tell you all that I really feel. Now, Shao Ching, you are accused of this terrible crime. The days, months have gone by, and it is drawing close to the end of winter. I am forced to go in attendance upon Emperor to Yang. If you should suddenly meet with that which cannot be disguised by euphemism, it would mean that I would have no opportunity to unburden to you my bitterness and anguish. Then, in the long journey hereafter, your spirit would forever bear me personal resentment. So, I beg you to allow me to explain in brief my rude and unworthy feelings and I pray you will not blame me too severely for having been so long in answering. I have heard it said that to devote oneself to moral training is the storehouse of wisdom. To delight in giving to others is the beginning of humanity. That proper giving and taking are the mark of a man's sense of duty. While times of shame and disgrace determine his courage, and that making a name for himself is the aim of all action. Only when a man has shown that he possesses these five qualities may he take a place in the world and rank among the host of superior men. No more severe misfortune can come to a man than to be driven by covetous desires. No sadness is so painful as the grief of the heart. No deed is more hideous than bringing shame to one's ancestors, and no disgrace greater than the palace punishment, that is, castration. That a man who has undergone such punishment is fit no longer to be associated with is the opinion not of one age alone but has been held since ancient times. When Duke Ling of Wei rode in the same carriage with Yung Chu, Confucius departed for Chen. Because Shang Yang obtained audience with the king through the offices of Qing Qian, Xiao Liang's heart turned cold. When Xiao Tan rode in the emperor's carriage, Yuan Su was fired with anger. So, from old times, men have been ashamed to associate with eunuchs. If even ordinary men are loath to have dealings with eunuchs, how much more so in the case of gentlemen of virtue and feeling? Although our court today may be in need of good men, what business would I, a mere remnant of the knife and saw, have in trying to help and recommend the finest and most worthy men of the world? Because of the undertakings of my father, which have passed on to me, I have been allowed for some 30 years to serve beneath the hub of the royal carriage, always awaiting my punishment. I realize full well that, first of all, in serving our enlightened emperor, I have not been able to pay due fidelity or inspire real confidence, nor have I gained a name for cleverness in planning or superiority of ability. Second, I have been able to perform no service in repairing deficiencies or supplying what was lacking in the imperial rule or in promoting and advancing men of virtue and talent, nor have I brought to light any gentlemen who are living in retirement. In foreign affairs, I have commanded no ranks of men, captured no castles, and fought on no field. No glories of generals slain or enemy pennants seized are mine. At the least, I have not, by piling up the days and sticking to my labors, achieved any high position or large salary, or brought glory and favor to my family and friends. I have not succeeded in a single one of these four endeavors. From this, it is obvious that I am a worthless person who, by mere chance, has been tolerated at court. Once in former times, I too took my place among the lower officers and participated in the lesser deliberations in the outer court. If I could not at that time introduce any great precepts or present any of my ideas, now when I am no more than a slave who sweeps the paths, mutilated and ranked among the low and worthless, now should I try to lift up my head and look broadly and discourse upon right and wrong, would I not show contempt for the court and bring shame to the gentlemen of my time? Alas, alas, a man like myself, what can he say now? What can he to know the beginning and end of things? Friends, my voice is breaking. Tears are flooding my eyes. Let me recover myself for a minute. Oh, sorry, guys. I'm sorry for that. I became emotional while reading Sima Qian's prose. It is not easy to know the beginning and end of things. When I was young, I had a spirit that would not be bridled, and as I grew older, I won no fine praises in my village and district. But because of my father, our ruler graciously allowed me to offer my poor talents and to come and go in the inner parts of the palace. Therefore, I cut off my acquaintanceship with friends and visitors and neglected the business of our family. I considered then that a man who has a bowl over his head cannot hope to see the sky. Day and night, I thought only how to use to the fullest my poor talents and strength. I went about the duties of my office with a single mind, seeking only the favor and love of our ruler. But, quite contrary to my hopes, things came to a terrible misunderstanding. Li Ling and I both held office at the same time. Basically, we were never very close. Our likes and dislikes lay in different directions. We never so much as drank a cup of wine together or shared the joys of intimate friendship. But I observed that he was clearly a man of superior ability. He was filial to his parents and trustworthy with his associates, honest in matters of money and just in all his giving and taking. In questions of precedence, he would always yield. He was respectful and modest and gave way to others. His constant care was to sacrifice himself for his country, hastening in time of need without thought for his own safety. This was always in his mind, and I believed him to be truly one of the finest men of the nation. A subject who will go forth to face 10,000 deaths, giving not the slightest thought for his own life, but hurrying only to the rescue of his Lord. Such a man is rare indeed. Now he has committed one act that was not right, and the officials who think only to save themselves and protect their own wives and children vie with each other in magnifying his shortcomings. Truly, it makes me sick at heart. The infantry that Li Ling commanded did not come up to 5,000. They marched deep into barbarian territory, strode up to the ruler's court, and dangled the bait, as it were, right before the tiger's jaws. In fearless ranks, they shouted a challenge to the powerful barbarians, gazing up at their numberless hosts. For over 10 days, they continued in combat with the Shan Yu. The enemy fell in disproportionate numbers. Those who tried to rescue their dead and wounded could not even save themselves. The barbarian lords, in their robes of felt, trembled with fear. They summoned their wise kings of the left and right and called out all the men who could use a bow. The whole nation descended together upon our men and surrounded them. They fought their way along for 1,000 miles until their arrows were all gone and the road was blocked. The relief forces did not come, and our dead and injured lay heaped up. But Li Ling, with one cry, gave courage to his army, so that every man raised himself up and wept. Washed in blood and choked with tears, they stretched out their empty bows and warded off the bare blades of the foe. North again they turned and fought to the death with the enemy. Before Li Ling fell into the hands of the enemy, a messenger came with the report of his attack, and the lords and ministers of the Han all raised their cups in joyous toast to the emperor. But after a few days came word of his defeat, and because of it, the emperor could find no flavor in his food and no delight in the deliberations of the court. I'll change hands for a while, friends. The great officials were in anxiety and fear and did not know what to do. Observing His Majesty's grief and distress, I dared to forget my mean and lowly position, sincerely desiring to do what I could in my fervent ignorance. I considered that Li Ling had always shared with his officers and men their hardships and want, and could command the loyalty of his troops in the face of death. In this he was unsurpassed even by the famous generals of old. And although he had fallen into captivity, I perceived that his intention was to try to seek some future opportunity to repay his debt to the Han. Though in the end he found himself in an impossible situation, yet the merit he had achieved in defeating and destroying so many of the enemy was still worthy to be proclaimed throughout the world. This is what I had in my mind to say, but I could find no opportunity to express it. Then it happened that I was summoned into council, and I took the chance to speak of Li Ling's merits in this way, hoping to broaden His Majesty's view and put a stop to the angry words of the other officials. But I could not make myself fully understood. Our enlightened ruler did not wholly perceive my meaning, but supposed that I was trying to disparage the Ershi general and plead a special case for Li Ling. So I was put into prison, and I was never able to make clear my fervent loyalty. Because it was believed that I had tried to deceive the emperor, I was finally forced to submit to the judgment of the law officials. My family was poor and lacked sufficient funds to buy commutation of the sentence. Of my friends and associates, not one would save me. Among those near the emperor, no one said so much as a word for me. My body is not made of wood or stone, yet alone I had to face the officials of the law. Hidden in the depths of prison, to whom could I plead my case? This Shaoqing is something you must truly have seen for yourself. Was this not the way I was always acted? Li Ling had already surrendered alive and destroyed the fine reputation of his family. And then I was thrown into the silkworm chamber where castrations were performed. Together we became a sight for all the world to laugh at in scorn. Alas, alas, matters such as these it is not easy to explain in detail to ordinary people. Page 63. My father had no great deeds that entitled him to receive the split tallies or the red charter. He dealt with affairs of astronomy and the calendar, which are close to divination and worship of the spirits. He was kept for the sport and amusement of the emperor, treated the same as the musicians and jesters, and made light of by the vulgar men of his day. If I fell before the law and were executed, it would make no more difference to most people than one hair of 9 oxen, for I was nothing but a mere ant to them. The world would not rank me among those men who were able to die for their ideals, but would believe simply that my wisdom was exhausted and my crime great, that I had been unable to escape penalty and in the end had gone to my death. Why? Because all my past actions had brought this on me, they would say. A man has only one death. That death may be as weighty as Mount Tai, or it may be as light as a goose feather. It all depends upon the way he uses it. Above all, a man must bring no shame to his forebears. Next, he must not shame his person, nor be shameful in his countenance, nor in his words. Below such a one is he who suffers the shame of being bound, and next he who bears the shame of marked clothing. Next is the man bound and fettered, who knows the shame of rod and thorn, and the man who bears the shame of the shaved head and the binding manacle. Below again is the shame of mutilated flesh and severed limbs. Lowest of all is the extreme penalty, the punishment of rottenness. The commentary says, punishment shall not extend to the high officials. This means that a gentleman must be ever careful of proper conduct. When the fierce tiger dwells in the deep hills, all the other beasts tremble with fear. But when he is in the trap or the cage, he wags his tail and begs for food, for he has been gradually overawed and broken. Therefore, there are cases when Even though one were to draw a circle on the ground and call it a prison, a gentleman would not enter. Or though one carved a wooden image and set it up as judge, a gentleman would not contend with it, but would settle the affair for himself in accordance with what is right. But when a man has been bound hard and hand and foot with stocks and ropes, has been stripped to the skin and flogged with rods, and plunged into the depths of encircling walls, at that time when he sees the judge, he strikes his head upon the ground, and when he looks at the jailers, his heart gasps with fear. Why? Because he has been gradually overawed and broken by force. A man must be thick skinned indeed if he come to this and yet say, I am not ashamed. What respect could people have for such a man? Sipo was an earl and yet he was imprisoned at Yu Li. Li Su was prime minister yet he suffered all the five punishments. Hua Yin was a king but he was put into fetters at Shen. Peng Yue and Chang Ao faced south and called themselves independent, but they were both dragged to prison and punished. The Marquis of Qian overthrew and punished all the Lu family. His power exceeded that of the five protectors of old, yet he was imprisoned in the inquiry room. The Marquis of Weiqi was a great general, yet he wore the red clothing and was bound with three fetters. Chi Pu was a manacled slave for Chu Chia, and Quan Fu suffered same in the prison of Chu Shi. All these men achieved the positions of feudal lords, generals, or ministers, and their fame reached to neighboring lands. But when they were accused of crimes and sentence was passed upon them, there was not one who could settle the matter with his hands by committing suicide. In the dust and filth of bondage, it has ever been the same, past and present. How, in such circumstances, can a man avoid shame? From this, you can see that bravery and cowardice are only a matter of circumstance. Strength and weakness are only a matter of the conditions. This is certain. Is there any reason to wonder at it? Furthermore, if a man does not quickly make his decision to settle things for himself outside the law, but waits until he has sunk lower and lower, till he lies beneath the whip and lash, and then decides to save his honor by suicide, is it not too late? This is probably the reason why the ancients hesitated to administer punishment to officials. It is the nature of every man to love life and hate death, to think of his relatives and look after his wife and children. Only when a man is moved by higher principles is this not so. Then there are things which he must do. Now I must have been most unfortunate, for I lost my parents very early. With no brothers or sisters or close relations, I have been left alone, an orphan. And you yourself, Shao Qing, have seen me with my wife and child and know how things are. Yet the brave man does not necessarily die for honor, while even the coward may fulfill his duty. Each takes a different way to exert himself. Though I might be weak and cowardly and seek shamelessly to prolong my life, yet I know full well the difference between what ought to be followed and what rejected. How could I bring myself to sink into the shame of ropes and bonds? If even the lowest slave and scullion maid can bear to commit suicide, why should not one like myself be able to do what has to be done? But the reason I have not refused to bear these ills and have continued to live, dwelling in vileness and disgrace without taking my leave, is that I grieve that I have things in my heart which I have not been able to express fully, and I am shamed to think that I am gone. After I am gone, my writings will not be known to posterity. Too numerous to record are the men of ancient times who were rich and noble and whose names have yet vanished away. It is only those who were masterful and sure, the truly extraordinary men who are still remembered. When the Earl of the West was imprisoned at Yu he expanded the changes. Confucius was in distress and he made the spring and autumn. Chu Yuan was banished and he composed his poem Encountering Sorrow. After So Chiu lost his sight, he composed the narratives from the states. When Sun Tzu had had his feet amputated, he set forth the art of war. Lu Pu Wei was banished to Shu, but his Lu land has been handed down through the ages. While Han Fei Tzu was held prisoner in Qian, he wrote the difficulties of disputation and the sorrow of standing alone. Most of the 300 poems of Book of Odes were written when the sages poured forth their anger and dissatisfaction. All these men had a rankling in their hearts, for they were not able to accomplish what they wished. Therefore, they wrote about past affairs in order to pass on their thoughts to future generations. Those like So Chiu, who was blind, or Sun Tzu, who had no feet, could never hold office, so they retired to compose books in order to set forth their thoughts and indignation, handing down their theoretical writings in order to show to posterity who they were. I too have ventured not to be modest, but have entrusted myself to my useless writings. I have gathered up and brought together the old traditions of the world which were scattered and lost. I have examined the deeds and events of the past and investigated principles behind their success and failure, their rise and decay in 130 chapters. I wished to examine into all that concerns heaven and man, to penetrate the changes of the past and present, completing all as the work of one family. But before I had finished my rough manuscript, I met with this calamity. It is because I regretted that it had not been completed that I submitted to the extreme penalty without rancor. When I have truly completed this work, I shall deposit it in the famous mountain. If it may be handed down to men who will appreciate it and penetrate to the villages and great cities, then though I should suffer 1,000 mutilations, what regret should I have? Such matters as these may be discussed with a wise man, but it is difficult to explain them to ordinary people. It is not easy to dwell in poverty and lowliness while base men multiply their slanderous counsels. I met this misfortune because of the words I spoke. I have brought upon myself the scorn and mockery even of my native village, and I have soiled and shamed my father's name. With what face can I again ascend and stand before the grave mound of my father and mother? Though 100 generations pass, my defilement will only become greater. This is the thought that wrenches my bowels 9 times each day. Sitting at home, I am befuddled as though I had lost something. I go out and then realize that I do not know where I am going. Each time I think of this shame, the sweat pours from my back and soaks my robe. I am now no more than a servant in the harem. How could I leave of my own accord and hide far away in some mountain cave? Therefore, I follow along with the vulgar, floating and sinking, bobbing up and down with the times, sharing their delusion and madness. Now you, Shao Ching, have advised me to recommend worthy men and promote scholars. But would not such a course be at odds with my own intent? Now, although I should try to add glory and fame to myself, or with fine words seek to excuse my error, it would have no effect upon the vulgar. I would not be believed, but would only take upon myself further shame. Only after the day of death shall right and wrong at last be determined. I cannot convey in writing my full meaning, but I have ventured to set forth in brief my unworthy opinion. Concluding remarks. After Qian died, his book came gradually to light. In the time of Emperor Xuan, BC 73 to 48, Qian's grandson by his daughter, the Marquis of Pengtung, Yang Huan, worked to transmit and make known his work so that finally it circulated widely. In the time of Wang Mang, Qian's descendant was sought out and enfeoffed with the title Viscount Master of History. Appraisal. From ancient times, when writings and documents were first made, there were historian officials and their records were very numerous and comprehensive. Later, Confucius collected these, going back as far as Yao of Tang and down to Mu of Qin. Although there are literary remains from the ages before Tang and Yu, Yao and Shun, their words are not canonical. Therefore, it is impossible to speak clearly about the affairs of the Yellow Emperor or Xuan Shu. Then Confucius used the historical records of Lu and made the spring and autumn, and so Chu Ming collected and discussed the events upon which it is based in order to form a commentary. He also edited those accounts which differed to form the narratives from the states. There is also the genealogical origins, which covers the period from the Yellow Emperor down to the time of the spring and autumn, and records the ancestors and lineage of emperors, kings, feudal lords, and great officials. After the time of the spring and autumn, the seven states fought back and forth, and Qin finally united the feudal lords. For this period, there is the intrigues of the warring states. Then the Han arose, conquered the Qin, and ruled the world, and we have the spring and autumn of Shu and Han. Therefore, Suma Qian followed the narratives from the states, selected material from the genealogical origins and the intrigues of the warring states, incorporated the text of the spring and autumn of Chu and Han, and added an account of recent affairs, bringing his history down to the era Tian Han, BC 100 to 97. His discussions of Qin and Han are very detailed, but when it comes to the way in which he has extracted from the classics, selected from the commentaries, and assessed and disposed of material from the various schools of philosophy, he is often careless and sketchy and takes improper liberties with his sources. With his diligence, he had browsed very widely in books, threaded his way through the classics and commentaries, and galloped up and down from the past to the present, covering a period of several thousand years. Yet his judgments stray rather often from those of the sage. In discussing fundamental moral law, he venerates the teachings of the Yellow Emperor and Lao Tzu and slights the six classics. In his introduction to the Memoirs of the Wandering Knights, he disparages gentlemen scholars who live in retirement and speaks in favor of heroic scoundrels. In his narration on merchandise and prices, he honors those who are skilled at making a profit and heaps shame on those in poverty and low station. It is these points which mark his work. Yet Liu Xiang, Yang Xiong, and other men of wide learning and copious letters all praise Qian as a man of excellent ability as a historian and testify to his skill in setting forth events and their causes. He discourses without sounding wordy. He is simple without being rustic. His writing is direct and his facts sound. He does not falsify what is beautiful, nor does he conceal what is evil. Therefore, his may be termed a true record. Alas, Qian, with all his wide knowledge and experience, yet failed to understand how to keep himself from harm. After he had suffered the extreme penalty, he was despondent and poured forth his resentment. How sincere his letter is, telling of all he suffered and felt shame for. It ranks with the chief eunuch of the lesser odes. But what the great ode says, enlightened and wise, he keeps himself from harm. This indeed is difficult. So the biography of Suma Qian end ஆயிடுச்சு at page 69. Page 70 இருந்து the beginnings of Chinese historiography. So next chapter எடுக்கிறதுக்கு முன்னாடி I think I should take some rest. So friends, we will stop this live over here. I'll rest for a while and then we'll take up other things. Okay, friends. So ends our live right now. I think I'll stop the thing right here and let us see what kinds of. Okay, it has gone for 2 hours, 10 minutes. Two viewers are still there live, but the live chat doesn't show any comments. So I'm here with closing it. Thank you, friends.